Il y avait une autre chose que je voulais vous demander.
Inglourious Basterds is packed with some of the most memorable scenes in Quentin Tarantino's filmography, largely thanks to Christoph Waltz's Oscar-winning performance. But this scene, known simply as the strudel scene, is in a category of its own, because it's one of the few scenes in the film where the build-up doesn't actually end with a climax of violence. It's the moment where the film's infamous opening is also finally given some meaning, as for the first time since The Farmhouse, Hans Landa and Shosanna are pulled back into each other's orbit. What makes this scene so uncomfortable is how long Tarantino makes us sit inside the moment. For two characters just talking opposite each other, it runs for 7 minutes, and the audience is primed for a repeat of what happened the last time these two shared a room. The camera isn't as theatrical as it had been in scenes leading up to this one. The coverage is quite standard. The scene is still, time stretches, and for the most part, everything we're feeling in this scene is built on the framing, two great performances, and of all things, strudel. Before diving into the breakdown, let's first set the stage and establish the context that leads us to this chilling moment.
Sound good?
By this point in Inglourious Basterds, Shosanna has already survived something she was never meant to escape. Years earlier, she's hiding with her family beneath the floorboards of a French dairy farmer's house when Hans Landa arrives to question the farmer sheltering them. Calmly and methodically, Landa uncovers the truth and orders her family's execution. Shosanna escapes, she runs, and Landa lets her go. A decision that becomes a quiet clue to the question hanging over the scene we're breaking down today, one I'll come back to after we've examined how this scene unfolds. The opening scene is where we learn everything we need to know about Landa. We deduct immediately that he is a dangerously competent detective. His power isn't expressed through volume or threat. It shows up in how comfortable he is inside the moment, how he relishes his job. His charm feels deliberate, almost performative. Years later, Shosanna resurfaces in Paris, under a new identity, running a small cinema and trying to remain invisible in occupied France. All that ends when she meets Friedrich Zoller, a celebrated German soldier who takes interest in her and her movie theatre. Not long after, Shosanna is approached outside her cinema by Major Hellstrom and escorted away without warning. She's taken to a high-end restaurant where she's reunited with Zoller and introduced to Joseph Goebbels. They explain their interest in her theatre and raise the possibility of premiering Goebbels' latest propaganda film there. She holds herself together, but the stakes rise dramatically as Landa joins the party. And Tarantino wastes no time shifting the balance of the scene with how he introduces Landa. We don't cut to him with a clean introduction shot. Instead, the frame rearranges itself around Shosanna. Landa is already standing behind Shosanna when we cut back to her. Hellstrom immediately stands to attention, and Shosanna becomes compositionally boxed in. She's visually trapped, underscoring how the rest of the scene will play out. The camera tilts up and lifts to frame Landa standing directly over Shosanna, shifting the balance of the scene in a single move. This moment isn't about Landa arriving, it's about Shosanna losing her grip on the space, and Tarantino communicates that entirely through camera language. An ominous pulse of music underscores the shift, pushing the tension higher, before it's abruptly released with a cut to a wide shot of Goebbels seated with his French mistress and her dog. I bring this up because the dog is framed casually at the table, treated no differently than a person. It's a ridiculous image, and that contrast is deliberate. The tension is deflated, enough to let the audience breathe, mixing the absurd with the threatening. We then cut back to Shosanna for the longest shot in the entire scene, a 58-second mid-shot that slowly dollies forward to a close-up. As Hans explains to the others that he needs to question her about her cinema ahead of the premiere, we never actually see the exchange itself. The conversation happens around her, off-screen. This 58-second push-in pulls the audience further into Shosanna's perspective, aligning us to feel her mounting anxiety. Together, these two shots do a lot of heavy lifting. By the time the scene relaxes into straightforward coverage, the tension is already set through the camera's framing, movement, duration, and proximity. What's striking is how much of the rest of the scene echoes the film's opening. The framing, the pacing, even the way the tension is allowed to breathe, it all echoes the farmhouse interrogation where Shosanna's family was murdered. That resemblance is a visual callback, quietly threading the two scenes together. The reason for that mirroring only becomes clear by the end of this sequence, and it's something worth returning to once we've seen how the rest of the scene plays out. Landa claims the space, and Tarantino makes that clear with his first shot once he sits, a wide over-the-shoulder frame from Shosanna's perspective. The geometry is settled early. She's anchored in the foreground, while he controls the depth of the frame. He orders 2 strudels, a coffee for himself and a glass of milk for Shosanna. Her reaction to the milk is crucial. It mirrors exactly what the audience is thinking and cements what this scene is really about. Does Landa know who she really is? Is this a deliberate provocation, a quiet reminder of the farmhouse, or simply an attempt to put her at ease? It's something Tarantino ultimately leaves open for the audience to decide, and the film offers enough quiet clues to point in either direction. I personally don't think Landa knows who's sitting opposite him, and I'll explain why once we've worked through the scene. Landa forgets to order the cream, and again, Shosanna is interrupted as he remembers to order it. I say again because much of the tension at the beginning of this scene is sustained through Shosanna being interrupted. She rarely gets to finish a thought. The waiter steps in to take their order. Landa cuts her off to reassure her not to be anxious. The scene keeps stopping and restarting, never allowing a clean conversational rhythm to form. It's a controlled stutter, progress, interruption, reset, and it keeps both her and the audience suspended. It's only once the cream is placed on the table that the conversation is finally allowed to unfold. From here on, the scene settles into what is essentially straightforward coverage, but even these basic shots are visually communicating something. Now, similarly to the opening scene, Tarantino begins by placing Landa, the person of authority, in a wider shot than the person sitting opposite him. As each scene progresses, the framing gradually tightens, mirroring the words being spoken and confining the characters as the tension builds. It's a basic technique, but an effective one, visually reinforcing the imbalance of power at play. The closer the camera is to Landa, the more threatening he appears, and as the frame closes in on the people opposite him, they appear increasingly vulnerable. If the scene was staged the other way around, close on Landa and wide on Shosanna, the power dynamic would feel off. On an unconscious level, the danger wouldn't land in the same way. We wouldn't feel on edge. The dialogue could remain identical, the performances unchanged, and the outcome exactly the same, but the tension would soften and thus lose its underlying pressure. In both scenes, the camera isn't just observing the exchange, it's instructing the audience on how to feel about it. Tarantino knows this. Take one of the final scenes in which Landa attempts to negotiate his freedom. The setup is similar, 2 sides seated at a table, yet the framing tells a very different story. There's tension building in this scene, that being whether Landa will secure his freedom through the deal he's trying to strike. Even though Aldo and Udovic are prisoners, they still hold power, and that's communicated through the framing. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk about the strudel and the cream, because it's where a lot of people read the scene as a giveaway. The argument usually goes like this. During World War II, due to food shortages, the pastries were made with lard, which is pig fat. Landa insisting that Shosanna wait for the cream before eating is seen as deliberate, the implication being that, combined, the dessert would no longer be kosher. The idea is that Landa is watching to see whether she hesitates or whether she refuses to eat it. Tarantino even underlines the moment with 2 insert close-ups, both focused on Shosanna's strudel, not Landa's. One when the cream is placed on top, and another when she finally cuts herself a bite. I personally can't get behind this theory. It feels like a stretch, even with the close-ups. Landa enjoys toying with the people he questions. We see that clearly with the dairy farmer, and here he's doing what he always does, being disarmingly friendly while maintaining control. If anything, if we look to the script, it suggests the opposite. In a scene that didn't make the movie following the farmhouse massacre, Landa and his men discuss Shosanna's fate as they drive away. The assumption is simple and brutal, she won't survive. As far as Landa is concerned, she's already dead. It's extremely likely Landa has long forgotten about the young Jewish girl who escaped years earlier. If you want, pause the video and have a read. After Shosanna's first bite, the questioning continues, and with each cut back to her, the camera is dollying forward. The frame tightens around her, slowly compressing her space. while Landa remains framed wide and at ease. We eventually cut back to a wider mid-shot of Shosanna, but now she's placed dead center in the frame. With no asymmetry or negative space to lean into, she's visually pinned in place, and we the audience feel this. After the gradual tightening of the close-ups, this wider framing should feel like relief, only it doesn't. Compare that to Landa's mid-shots. His gaze is angled towards Shosanna, as it should be, but his looking room is minimal and pushed to the edge of the frame. The space he would typically be looking into is left empty, and that imbalance redirects attention onto Shosanna. The composition concentrates the pressure on her, even if we're not consciously aware of it. It's all visually emphasizing Landa's complete control over Shosanna. He offers her a cigarette, which she accepts. Once again, the scene mirrors the opening, both parties now smoking. After all the verbal and visual pressure, Landa finally says,
Il y avait une autre chose que je voulais vous demander.
Then he stops, and we get 10 seconds of silence. It feels like a psychological assault. And we get the same facial expression and framing on Landa as we did in the opening scene, right as he questions the dairy farmer about the Jews hiding beneath his floorboards. It's a complete visual callback. We're expecting the scene to now finally rupture and explode in Tarantino fashion.
Mais maintenant, sur ma vie, impossible de m'en souvenir.
But it doesn't. Instead of a satisfying resolution, we're left wondering, does Landa recognize Shosanna, and is he just playing with her? Landa ashes his cigarette into the strudel, another gesture that's often hailed as a clue, kisses Shosanna's hand and exits. Shosanna exhales, she almost breaks, and the scene ends. Now, it's worth noting that the scene in which Landa discusses the fate of the young Shosanna never made the final cut, and in the film as it stands, we're never given a definitive answer as to whether he recognises her as the young girl who escaped all those years ago. That ambiguity is the point. The scene is designed to remain unresolved. The movie is full of scenes that play with tension and then explosive resolution, but this one is different. It's actually quite remarkable how little Tarantino relies on explanation to make this scene work. There's no reveal or dramatic payoff. Instead, the entire mystery is supported through framing, staging, actions, duration, and restraint to become something that it doesn't. By the end of the scene, nothing has technically changed, and yet everything feels different. Tarantino turns uncertainty into the point of the scene, trusting the audience to feel the meaning rather than be told it. And that's why this moment lingers. It refuses closure. And that lingering uncertainty is exactly what makes the scene so gripping, and why it's still being debated years later.